We get to come to church. I tell you, you may be in for an interesting experience this morning. I went camping with my son at Boy Scout camp, and I slept on a very uncomfortable bed. And when I say slept, I'm being a bit fictitious. So, I know that sometimes people in the church doze off during the sermon. Should I do so? Just bear with me. One of you all in the front maybe throw a shoe or something. It was a rough. We had a really good time though. No, really. I mean, seriously, it was a lot of fun. It really was, and it rained really hard. There was a 1% chance of rain. 1%. We were the 1% that got it. So we're apparently what Occupy Wall Street hates so much. We were the 1%. It's a political joke. Sorry, I'm done with that. If you're visiting with us this morning, we want you to know how excited we are that you're here. Please let us get to know you. I would love to talk to you after services. I go back there, generally speaking, and I would love to meet you. If you're new in town or something and looking for somewhere to worship regularly, or if you've been here for a long time and you're looking for somewhere, you're looking for a church home, I hope you feel like you found it. Because I can tell you from my own experience, this is, I think, my 11th sermon here, week 10. I can tell you from my own experience of growing into this church, this is a place to be blessed. You will be blessed if you come here again and again, because God is at work among us and doing good things. So if you want that, that's what we have, and we want it for you. So if you're looking for somewhere to worship regularly, hope you feel like you found it. And if you're visiting, you picked a good week to come because we're starting a new sermon series today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch into that. We're going to begin talking about cross training. The reason I wear a jacket is because I have a bit of a gut. So, when it comes to the physical cross training, my good friend Kent Plank and I are trying to work on that. I've spent time walking up Long John Mountain with him. I've done it twice now. He walks and talks, I walk and wheeze. And I'm working to get that back under control because honestly, I'm happy to admit I'm out of shape. Well, actually, I'm not at all happy to admit that, but I'm willing to. And am I alone? Am I the only one who's fighting? In this culture, do you know how much obesity we have in the American culture? How many of us have an unhealthy relationship with food and an unhealthy relationship with activity if we're not absolutely estranged from it? We just are not in the best of shape as a people group. If you go to other places in the world, their lifestyle forces them to stay in shape. They haven't adopted a lifestyle, they live that lifestyle. I remember one time I was in Africa and I left a bag up on a mountain. And I was riding with a car of people who were going down early. And I said to one of the people before the car took off, "Hey, can you grab my bag?" And they said, "Yeah, absolutely." They thought I was kidding. I was not. I thought they were serious. They were kidding. My bag stayed up on the mountain. So we had to go back and get it because my passport was in it. Well, one of the Africans had taken it back to his hut, right? Now, this is in a place in Uganda called the Mountains of the Moon, where the hills they are like this, they're insane. And this African guy says, "Yes, I will go get your bag. It is just right here. I live just here." And I said, "Well, I'll go with you. I'd love to meet your family." He looked at me and he said, I will go. I said, "No, really, I want to go with you." He's like, "Okay." And in his mind, he's going, "I'm getting nothing done today," And by just here, he meant 7 miles, and most of it uphill, both ways. And there were several times where I was walking along with this African, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, man," and he's like, "You should sit down," I'm like, and eventually we made it all the way to the house, and I gave him many gifts from my bag because I did not want to carry them back. Physical, but you know what? That guy was not even breaking a sweat because it was his lifestyle to walk up and down those mountains. It was his lifestyle to train. He didn't even think of it as training. He thought of it as going over there. I would have thought of that as training. This morning I'm inviting us into a lesson on Christian training. I'm calling a series of lessons that I'm calling cross training. Now I realize that that's an elliptical machine or something, and that you can buy a pair of shoes called cross trainers, which I suppose that you're supposed to specifically use them on an elliptical machine or something. Obviously I don't know, so I've gone over amply, but I'm using that because there's kind of a word play there. Did you get it? If you haven't gotten it yet, I can't help you. Well, hopefully you'll catch up with me before we're done. But I want to begin by talking with you just a little bit about my hero. This is my brother Richard. This last weekend, or maybe it was the weekend before, Richard participated in his fourth Arkansas Traveler. The Arkansas Traveler is a race that you run 100 miles in 24 hours. If you can't complete it in 24 hours, they cause you to drop out. So at about the 20-hour mark, they go out and find everyone at the 70-mile mark or below, and they say, you can go home, you're not going to finish. You're not going to complete the race. Do it again next year. To which people say, my brother has done this race 4 times. Actually, 3 3/4 times. Because this last time, well, you know what? I'll just go ahead and read to you what he posted on Facebook when he had to drop out. He said, oh no, can you shrink that? Doggone it, I should have gone over my slides. He says he had to drop out at the 63.7 mile mark. He had a close call with lightning at about the 43.5 mile mark. Heard a whoosh and then a crackling and immediate thunder. Hair stood on end all over. Was soaking wet, so it took something dramatic to stand my arm hair up. Puller hair monitor lit up like Las Vegas, just went crazy. Every muscle on my body seized up harder than it ever had in a single muscle cramping. No idea how long that lasted, probably just a few seconds, but it seemed like a long time. I don't mind saying it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Never could get things loosened up again and was getting more and more tight. Final straw was in more lightning coming toward me. I've only quit on one other race in my life, but I did the right thing, yada, yada, yada. I want to point this out. He dropped out of the race at 63.7 miles after being struck by lightning at 43.5 miles. Well, you know, he's not my twin brother. Thank you. That was better than my joke. Actually, he's really bright now because he glows. Just, you know, the electricity. See, anyway. But I want to point this out. He gets struck by lightning and then runs 20 miles. Can you do that? I cannot run 20 miles. You know, if I had to run 100 miles in a single day, I would die. You know, I would get my will in order before the race. I am not in shape to do that. The reason I include this slide, the not my twin brother thing, I had a friend one time when my brother was just running, you know, regular marathons, and he's running the Boston Marathon, and I told a friend of mine, I was up in New England at the time, I said, my brother's running the Boston Marathon. He went, not your twin brother. Thanks, Brian. That's good. And not this Brian, the guy's name. Anyway, I cannot do what my brother does. I can't do it. You know, I probably could, or perhaps I probably could have. I don't know that I can anymore. I don't know that even if I wanted to now, if I could. But he's not my twin brother. He's actually my much older brother. You know, he's 10 years older than I am. But I can't do what he does because I'm not willing to pay the price that he has paid to be able to do what he does. I'm not able to run that far. Now, Obviously, I'm not just talking about my older brother. I'm talking about my older brother. And in this regard, I hope that I am different. I hope that I am beginning to be able to do what my brother does. The brother I refer to here is Jesus Christ, who has come to be the first among many brothers, who calls us His brothers. He's our older brother. And just like I look up to my older brother, and I think I wish that I could do it, and I hope that I'm beginning to emulate my older brother a little bit in what I do with Kent. I'm not sure that I'll ever get to the point where I can run 100 miles, but I hope that I get to the point where I can run up Long John once. Maybe by the time I'm 45, I'll be able to do that if I enter into some vigorous training. You remember when I first came here, if you were here, that we talked about the crossword call of the Christ. This is a difficult thing to do. To deny yourself and take up the cross is very hard. It does not happen overnight. And it does, you have to begin. You have to begin someday. But just because you've begun does not mean that you're good at it. Right? Have you met Christians who aren't very good at it? Have you been a Christians that aren't very good at it? How do we get better at it? Because Jesus Christ went to the cross, but that was not the first time that Jesus had denied Himself. The cross was not unfamiliar territory to Jesus when He went there. The nails were new. The suffocation, He hadn't done that before. The 6 hours of agony He passed through was all new for Him. But the thing that took Him there was living the life that He had lived. He had prepared for an entire 33 years to be the kind of man who could do that. He had set up a life that was so obedient to God that when the extreme demand came, He was ready. He had trained His entire life for the cross. And He invites us into similar training. And this training is called discipleship. I realize that's a buzzword among churches of Christ because of some stuff that went on in the 80s where people were discipling each other. Have you ever heard of that? You know, where one person disciples another person. That is not what I'm talking about. You and I are both disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ. If you are a Christian, then what Jesus actually, this is Jesus' word. He said to the 12, or the 11, you go and make disciples. You know, Christians is a word they called us much later. The first word for what you are as a Christ follower is a disciple. And a disciple is a person who has entered into a lifestyle of training. Like my African friend who just lives a life. And he doesn't even necessarily think of it as training. He thinks of it as going over there. When you follow Jesus, He's gone over there and you're going over there. You are living your life as disciple, as apprentice, as learner. But not just academic learner who learns it with your brain. That's not what the disciples were. They were people who walked around behind Him and learned it with their very bodies. By what they did. By the experiences that they had, they chose to take up the Christ's way of life as their own way of life. And this invitation is to all of us. So many Christians are Christian couch potatoes. They are in the shape that I'm in physically, spiritually, with the inability to walk up a hill. Even a big hill. We ought to be able to walk up a hill, folks. We ought to be able to deal with tough times. We ought to be able to deal with tough people. We ought to certainly be able to deal with each other and love one another. Because if we can't love each other here, as we sang about our common love, If we can't be really good to one another here, how on earth will you love your enemy out there? And the role of disciple is one who becomes one who can love their enemy even in the practice of persecution, even as they're passing through the abuse. How can we follow Him? Well, I don't expect in this series to cover everything about that. Honestly, there's a future series that I really look forward to doing with you where we walk through the Sermon on the Mount together. I think that's the heart of Christ's teaching and the heart of your lifestyle. But a big way of putting that stuff in flesh is service. Living a life where one serves others is one of the ways that we discipline our hearts, that we train our hearts, and that together with the Christ, we find our hearts reshaped. I don't say this because of what I have, my opinion. I say this because of the teaching of the Christ. If you've got your Bibles, you want to open them or turn them on and look for the little doohickey that gets you to Matthew chapter 20. That's where we're going today. Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 20. We have these two disciples of Jesus, James and John, the brothers Zebedee, the sons of thunder. So, as sons of thunder and people of violence, they are about as far from the heart of the Christ when they're called as they can get. At one point, they would say, let's call down fire on those Samaritans, so they didn't accept us. And Jesus has to turn to them and go, no. These are hard men, fishermen. But they've walked with the Christ long enough to know that He's going to make it. Surely He is. This guy is the Deuteronomistic king. He is the king of Israel. And when they get there, they want the place of honor. They want to be beside the Christ. Now, they're absolutely right to want that, and you should want it too. We just have to walk with Christ a little bit to find out what that means. So their mother comes with them. In Matthew's telling of the story, the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her two sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And the Lord says to her, what do you want? He's a generous guy. He's going to give her what she wants. What do you want? As it says, say to these two sons of mine that they're to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, when you enter into your kingdom. Now, that question is, from a discipleship perspective, so ripe with problems. But these people can't even see it. Their understanding of what kind of king Jesus is the kind of king who would live in a place like this, sit in a place like this, in that middle chair there. And they want to sit in that chair and that chair. Why do they want those things? Well, because in their understanding of how kingship works, the king's role is to make people do what the king thinks is right. That's what the king is supposed to do. He's supposed to exercise power and force people. He's supposed to have armies that go out in violence. That's what kings do. And the great thing about being on the right and left is you get to be royal advisors. You don't ever have to be responsible for the hard decisions, but you get to have your will involved an awful lot in how the decisions get made. That guy in the middle chair, he's the one who has to actually make the call. But you get to have your voice heard and get to have your power and get to have your way. And folks, there are an awful lot of people who approach Christian life just that way. They want to get from God what they want, and they want church to be like they want it to be. They want to maintain their traditions and their perspectives, and they want to have their experiences. And maybe for some of us, what Brian did today when he came down here and sang, which, by the way, thank you so much for that. It wasn't hard for me at all, but maybe for some of us it was. And a lot of us approach church wanting to say, it needs to be my way. We approach life saying, it needs to be my way. It needs to look like what I want it to look like, which is what these two guys want. They want to be able to go to God and get control and get power. They want to stand with God's king and make sure that everything goes the way they want it to go. So they want the advisory role to the king, and they want the power, and they want the authority. And what they don't understand is they don't understand the nature of the king, because he's not the kind of person who is in those halls of authority. He's the kind of king who shows up in places like this, which, by the way, is a photo of a slave shack on a southern plantation. This is the kind of king they've got. They just don't understand. Because how can they? They are still driven by want and my desires and my things, where their king is driven by love. And want and desire and me and selfishness will never give its life away for other people. But love always does. Love always lays itself down for the other. The object of love can always make demands on the person who is doing the loving. And so they don't know just how alien and how far their heart is from the Christ. Quite honestly, when I see the distance between my own heart and His, I shudder. I think I still have so far to go with you, Christ. Help me get there, because I want my heart to be like His heart. But do you know what that'll cost? If you want that, do you know what it'll cost? James and John don't, which is why Jesus turns to them and says, you don't know what you're asking. You don't realize what you're asking, because what you're asking for will cost you everything that you are. The want and the hunger to be in power and be in control, that's going to die if you get what you really want. If you get what you're asking for, the only way that you can be here with me is if you become like me. And you can't continue to be like you are and come with me. So He says, are you able to drink the cup that I drink? Do you know what that cup is? That cup that led to us being able to drink this cup? The cup of giving your life away for the world? For the sake of the world, being willing to die so that they might know and they might believe, being willing to love the unlovable, being willing to be compassionate for the people that don't deserve it and are going to abuse it and take advantage of it. The people who will drive nails through your hands and your feet, are you willing to love even them? Are you able to drink the cup I drink? Well, they reveal the nature of their hearts, and their answer, we are able. Absolutely. Don't even know what it is yet. But sure, if it gets me that power, what they hear is, oh man, this is going to work. Awesome. Yes, absolutely. I'll drink that cup right down to the bottom if I get to be. This is great. No, James and John. No, church. No, Ethan. No, none of us. No, this is wrong. To go after power and to go after getting our way and to go after being first. It's all wrong. And so He says, well, you will drink my cup. Before it's done, before it's over with, James and John will be living different lives. Once they've seen the cross and they've seen the resurrection, it's going to shatter who they are. And they're going to become different people than they are on this side of the cross. But folks, you and I, we already stand on the other side of the cross. And so He comes to us saying, no, drink this cup instead, because you can do it. You will drink this cup. But to sit here and hear, that's not mine to grant, but it's for those for whom it's been prepared. Which, that means something. Not sure. My guess is, His Father and the Spirit. But what do I know? I mean, that's just my guess. But at any rate, Jesus is saying, it's not mine to tell you who gets to sit here and here. And it may even be that there isn't a here and here in His kingdom. Because in His kingdom, nobody is trying to be first, and nobody's trying to get their way, and nobody's trying to be in control of others. Instead, they're living an entirely different sort of way. And folks, I got to tell you, when we do church this way, beautiful things happen here. I am not kidding. When we do church the way that He's going to talk about right now, when we become servant of the other, and we live our whole lives that way, things are so wonderful. You'll lose your ability to complain about church if you take up what He says. He says, when the 10 heard of it, they're indignant, probably because they didn't think of it. You know, why didn't I get my mom here? My mom's at home, man. Who do you think you are? Which, incidentally, their indignation shows that they don't get it either. Because servants don't get indignant at their masters. They just don't. They know it's not their place. And you know who your master is? When you're following the Christ, your master is everybody else. Which is what He's going to say. He's going to say, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And their great ones exercise authority over them. Which, isn't that what all of Adam's race wants? Isn't it what we want? I want my way. I want what I think is good. I want the good life for myself. I want to enjoy my life. And anyone who stands in the way of that is an obstacle that I must either overcome, avoid, or destroy. I want to get away from things that I think are bad, onerous, and cumbersome. I don't want to have anything to do with those things. Instead, I want the ability to make the calls. I want to be in charge of my life. And boy, is this ever American. I want to be the captain of my own ship and pull myself up by my own bootstraps and have my own life and be first. I want to be a winner, baby. I want to get it all. I want to go for the gold. I want to get the... That's the American way. I want to dominate. And he says, that's the way of the world. You know that's how they behave. And you know that's in your heart, or I wouldn't have brought it up. But it shall not be so among you. This is not the way that Christians are to live. We are not to be people who dominate with our own ways. We are not to be people who use power and push people around and get what we want. We are not to be people who, if we don't have power, use manipulation and deceit to get what we want, who shame other people into giving us what we want. This is not who we are to be. It shall not be so among you. But instead, a completely alien to this world sort of way is to be your way of life. But whoever would be great, if you really want to be great, then you must be servant. And whoever would be first among you must be the slave of everybody. Now, before I move off this slide, I want you to think about that for a minute. And think of the people in your life, in this church, that you most respect and admire. Did Jesus just describe them? The people that are giving away their lives for the sake of others. Can you think of those people? Do you admire those people? Don't you want to be like them? Well, Jesus is telling you how to do it. He uses two words that are very alien, particularly to the Greek world that finds them. The Greeks did not think all that much of servants. At another place in the Scriptures, Jesus will ask, who is greater, the one who reclines at table or the one who serves? The Greek had no problem at all answering that question. Duh! It's the one who's sitting there getting what they want. If the other person was greater, they would be sitting down. But they're not, are they? So, duh. Of course, I mean, they just don't think all that much of servitude. The only kind of servitude that the Greek people thought was admirable was service to the state. You know, Plato would say a lot of good things about public service. It's always amazing to me that they call themselves public servants and they end up doing what they've been doing for the last 2 weeks. Public servants, really? Because the public wants this. This is the dish we hoped for. You know, but that's the only kind of service that the world out there really thinks is respectable. Why? Because it's service with power, not service from a perspective of weakness. And I'll tell you, if ever there was anything that the Greek mind hated, it's the concept of a slave. Because the Greek person defined themselves by their freedom to use their own minds for themselves, their freedom to think, their freedom to find their own good life. That's what made people good, is that they were free. By the way, does that sound familiar? No. Really? Okay, so you're from Europe then. Because we in America kind of love our freedom, don't we? We kind of want to be in the land of the slaves and the home of the coward. No, wait a minute. No, we want the land of the free, home of the brave. That's who we are. This doesn't swim real well in our currents either. I want to really quickly define these two words. A servant is literally the one who waits at a table. It's literally what it means. And so our word deacon actually comes from that, because the first deacons were people who fed Grecian widows. This is what they were doing, right? But that word actually, in the way that the Greeks used it, was much richer and deeper than just waiter. It meant a service that proceeded from love. And when love gets involved, what are the limits on service? You know, I have been a father for 10 years now, and I have found that things that I really thought were the limits of my service have been obliterated. You know, because I will give up sleep to hold back hair kneeling beside a toilet. Now that's not a job I like to do, right? I will go clean up vomit. That is not pleasant for me. And I won't do that for you. Well, unless you really need me to, you know. But I will do that for Silas. Absolutely. And I won't even think about it. And I will make sure that I do it so that Ashley doesn't have to. I will get up out of the bed and I will do that. Why? Love. Love compels service. And this word grabs some of that concept in its meaning. And you'll note it's the first one that Jesus used. That what guides Christian service is love. What drives us is the central Christian ethic. Love. It's not doing what I have to do. I have to do this. Don't want to. Grumble, rumble, 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 rumble. No, that's the book of Numbers. They got cursed for that. Love. Loving the other will guide you to do good for the other. And you will live your life doing good things, and you will reap no benefit from it, which leads us to the other word. Doulos. Doulos means one whose will is subjected to the will of another and who reaps no benefits from their actions. If you're doing something and you're getting something from it, then you're not a doulos. You know, you might be doing something really admirable, but if a lot of people look at you and go, look at that great Christian, then you've just defeated the concept of doulos. The flesh screams against slavery, but it writhes and throws a temper tantrum on the floor against secret slavery. This service where I subject my will, because what I want to do is that, and I have to do this. But love leads me to do it. And even though I do not want to, and even though I cry out to my Father, Abba, Father, if it's possible, let this burden pass from me, but not what I want, but what you want. Do you hear the familiarity of this term? This is the life of discipleship where you give your life away, even as did our Christ. This is discipleship. The life lived for the sake of others. And it leads you to become like the Son of Man. Because when He says you need to do all this, He concludes all that by saying, even as me. Follow me. Be as I am. Do as I do. Come with me. And let's walk up this difficult hill together. And like Kent Plank, he'll be able to breathe, and he'll keep talking to you the whole way and encouraging you and keep you putting one foot in front of the other, even though what you want to do is, hang on, this hurts. I don't like this, because they don't appreciate it. They're not saying thank you enough. They didn't come and kiss my ring when I served them. They didn't do what I needed my ego stroked, and none of them stroked my ego. None of them made me feel good. I'm not getting my way. And He says, come on. Be like me, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give His life as a ransom for many. And as I said at the beginning of the sermon, giving His life is not something He did one time on the cross. It's what He did His whole life, and how He was able to go to the cross. He lived a cross-marked life His entire life. So should you. You also are called to carry the cross. You also are called to walk the way of the cross. And if you will find your heart trained. I cannot run 100 miles. But if God gave me enough life, and if I were willing to pay the price, then perhaps I could run 100 miles. I cannot love my enemy. But if God gives me enough life and lets me walk with the Christ, and if I'm willing to pay the price, and if I'm willing to serve my friends, my brothers, even if they never thank me, then perhaps my enemy will become increasingly lovable. Not because they become more love-worthy, but because I become more loving. Because I am living a life together with the Christ. This is cross-training. Does it sound attractive? I mean, in some ways it doesn't, right? You got to be honest and go, no, that doesn't sound like any fun at all. And yet, if I were able to do that, if I could become a person who could be like Him, if I could have my heart beat with His heart, what price is too steep? And the great thing is that the Christ has paid the price to open the way for you. Discipleship is something empowered by His Holy Spirit. And as you walk together with Him, you will find yourself growing. And the Christ is saying what Kent Plank says. You want to go for a walk? Walk with me. Walk with the Christ. And if you do, you will find yourself increasingly being able to breathe. If that's not where you are, we want to pray for you. I can't make anybody Jesus' disciple. I can't force you to do it. But I'm certainly willing to pray, because the one who is able to make you stand is here among us now and will hear our prayers. And He will lift you up. So if you know in your life, I haven't been doing that, then come on, today's a good day to start. Let's go for a walk. And if you came to this place bearing a burden, perhaps it's sin. You know, if you've never been baptized, then it's time to begin your discipleship. Today would be a great day. We'll wait on lunch for that. Or if you came to this place bearing a burden of suffering and you need the cares and compassion and the service of the saints, then we want to do it. If this morning you're subject to the invitation of God, why don't you come right now while we stand and sing?
above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth.